What would the framers have said about Trump asserting that he could pardon himself?
I think they would have thought it was the most asinine assertion possible.
Why is that?
Because only someone who has absolute power, which is really what he's asserting, would think that they can pardon themselves for something like a crime, in my view. That the entire point of the Constitution was to create, again, this structure where there are checks and balances. And they were close to obsessed with creating a type of government where you wouldn't have a tyrant. I mean, that was everything they talked about. And to me, it would be the essence of being a tyrant, that you could commit crimes and then pardon yourself for them. So it's taking a little bit of text of the Constitution and ignoring the rest of the entire document and its structure and its purpose.
So, is there any sort of reasoning around what happens if the president, forget pardoning himself, if he uses the pardon power to obstruct justice? In other words, he uses the pardon power strategically to prevent investigations from succeeding against him or people close to him. That feels like a less clear area. Is there any reason that those pardons wouldn't be legitimate, or could a president be impeached for using the pardon power in that way?
Okay. I'll answer the last
That was
question.
a lot of questions at once.
and I'll try and break them down.
What happens when a president uses the pardon power to obstruct justice?
Well, your question included your knowledge that we don't have a case that's on point. So it was a good question. And you can be impeached for virtually anything, right? High crimes and misdemeanors, we don't have a definition of that. So arguably, yes, you could definitely impeach a president for misusing the pardon power. And I think why you have Trump asserting that he can self-pardon this way is that we law professors on some level guess what? Never anticipated a Donald Trump president. We didn't anticipate that. So we have long said in law schools that the pardon power is a highly discretionary power, and we use it as a hypothetical with our students and say, well, this is the only thing the court would never review because it is squarely within the power of the president. But that goes to the core of it being something that's about mercy and an assumption that you're forgiving someone. And again, Trump has put us in a box we never thought of, right? Someone who would think of, well, I'll forgive myself, and then where we're adding is for a crime. And so we do have a case on point, and it involves Richard Nixon, that Richard Nixon took it all the way to the Supreme Court, whether he could exert executive power and refuse to comply with a subpoena. And the Supreme Court said he had to comply with his subpoena, that he couldn't exert his power and his privilege as the president in the context of a criminal case. Now, had he been exerting that privilege to preserve some sort of national security interest, maybe it would have been a different outcome. But if it's a crime, we do have a case that says that there's not a reason to think a president can exert these king-like powers if you're committing a crime. So while we don't have a case directly on point, and that's because we haven't had a president assert such a horrible thing and do such a horrible thing, that when you put these two precedents together and the precedent we do have, it would seem that it would be absurd. And as some members of Congress have said, you would fire a lawyer who would tell you, hey, if you commit a crime, you can pardon yourself for it later, because we would hope the Supreme Court would step in.
If Trump were to pardon himself, what happens next? So he is the president, so it's unclear whether even he can be indicted before he would be impeached or removed. If we were to issue a pardon, does it get tested? Does it get tested by prosecutors? Does it get brought up as an objection to what happens with it? Where does it go? Who prints it?
Well, there is a big problem that the primary check on the pardon power was envisioned to be us, the voters, the people. So you were talking earlier about whether you show up to vote. So if the people don't get concerned enough about a misuse of a pardon, I mean, that you could be upset about pardons he's made already that aren't of himself, and the idea would be you're the check on him because you don't vote him back into office, or you don't vote the people who support him back into office. So again, we don't have a clear remedy except someone suing. And that could be arguably anyone. And the court could say, well, we don't want to hear it because they don't have standing, or the court could hear it because they did hear the case against President Nixon. So it would be a lawsuit, and we would hope that the Supreme Court would step in. But the Supreme Court's not going to step in and rule in a way that it doesn't think the people are behind. So big picture, the check on him doing something like this is being either impeached or the people thinking that this is just not something we can tolerate from a president.
Before I let you go, I do want to make one pitch, which is that the legal maneuver of self-pardoning to evade a crime, I want to call it autoerotic obstruction of justice. Just something for you to noodle on.
Okay.
Guys, give it up for Professor Kimberly West-Faulcon. Thank you so much for being here and for playing.